You're listening to the Partisan Comms Podcast.
There is a signal broadcast every second of every day through our television sets.
Welcome to episode 22. I'm Terrence. I'm going to say something that might sound like a conspiracy theory. And then I'm going to show you carefully why you don't need conspiracy theories anymore to feel uneasy. Because the scariest stories are the ones that don't require imagination. They only require paperwork. This episode is for the conspiracy theory aware, not the people who believe everything, but the people who have learned through bitter experience that sometimes the unbelievable is simply the unannounced. Sometimes the craziest ideas are just old truths with new branding. And sometimes the most terrifying thing is not that they're listening. It's that they don't have to listen at all. They can just count. We're going to talk about some names that still glow in the dark. Boundless Informant, Bullrun, COINTELPRO. One counts the world, one hunts encryption. One is a blueprint of domestic disruption. And when you lay them side by side, you start to see the shape of a machine. A machine that isn't a myth, it's a method. Let's begin with a rule of survival in the information age. If a story requires a secret cabal twirling mustaches in a candlelit room, it's probably wrong. But if a story requires only incentives, bureaucracy, technology, and a little secrecy, well, the story might be painfully accurate. Conspiracy culture teaches us to look for the dramatic moment, the dark meeting, the black helicopter, the single villain. Real surveillance states, however, don't need drama. They need procurement, they need legal authority, they need servers, they need vendors, they need forms, and they need budgets. They also need one very modern thing, and that's dashboards. Because power loves a summary. Power loves a number that it can point to. And power loves a map. Boundless Informant is described as an internal NSA data mining and visualization tool. It's a system that tracks where intelligence comes from and displays the volume of collection by country. Boundless Informant is not a spying tool in the traditional sense, but a meta-surveillance system. It allows the NSA to count, categorize, and visualize metadata collected worldwide. Metadata such as call records, email headers, IP connections, and routing information. Some of the key characteristics include displays country-by-country heat maps showing volumes of collected metadata. It differentiates between internet metadata and telephony metadata. It enables the NSA managers to assess where collection is strongest, weakest, or expanding. And it also demonstrates that the NSA can quantify surveillance activity, contradicting prior claims to Congress that such tracking was technically impossible.
Boundless Informant, which is sort of a global auditing system for the NSA's intercept and collection system that lets us track how much we're collecting, where we're collecting, by which authorities, and so forth. The NSA lied about the existence of this tool to Congress and to specific congressmen in response to previous inquiries about their surveillance activities.
While it does not capture content, Boundless Informant shows that metadata collection is massive, systematic, and globally distributed, including within the United States. The focus here is metadata, records about communications, rather than the content of emails or messages. That distinction will matter later. Because metadata sounds boring. It's designed to sound boring. Metadata is what you get if you want to say, "We didn't read your words." Okay. But metadata is also how you say, "We reconstructed your life anyway." The metadata collected includes jaw-dropping numbers. A global heat map described as showing 97 billion pieces of intelligence from computer networks worldwide in a single month-long window. And a figure of nearly 3 billion from U.S. networks over 30 days ending in March 2013. Now, this is a conspiracy-aware moment, but this is where the mind runs wild, because if a system can count and map the collection of metadata by country, it raises the question, how can an agency simultaneously say it can't track what it collects on Americans? And here's the careful answer that they give. It might be true that it can't identify every person with certainty, but it still can count records associated with network sources, regions, and systems. That means the agency may argue we can't confirm identity or location perfectly, but the dashboard can still say, here's the volume. And volume is its own kind of confession. There's an oversight clash between the NSA and lawmakers that makes this feel like a horror story instead of a story about policy. For example, a senator may ask whether the NSA collects any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans, and they may respond with no, sir. And later, public statements emphasize the uncertainty. The NSA says it cannot determine with certainty the identity or location of all communicants in all the data collected. Now, if you're conspiracy theory aware, you've probably felt this before, the feeling that language has become a hiding place. That officials don't lie by inventing things, they lie by selecting definitions. What counts as collect? What counts as data on? What counts as American? What counts as certainty?
I want to get your response to some of the blowback, I guess we'll call it, from the Obama administration. The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, said in congressional testimony back in March something quite controversial. I want to play that for you.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
Now, Clapper was asked about that statement in an interview with Andrea Mitchell over the weekend, and he said it was like a, when are you going to stop beating your wife kind of question, and he thought he answered it truthfully with a no. What's your response to what Director Clapper has said in response to questions about this from Senator Wyden and others?
There's a lot of dramatic interest in what's happening with Snowden, but the real focus here should be on exactly what you just asked about, which is what the National Security Agency is doing in total secrecy and whether or not they've been truthful with the U.S. Congress about what it is that they've been doing. And that answer that he just gave, which is that the United States is not wittingly collecting data on millions of Americans, we know to be an outright falsehood, because last week we published a document that demonstrates that the Obama administration has been going to the secret FISA court every 3 months and asking for and obtaining all phone records for all Americans for every call they make internationally and locally without any concern with whether or not the people on whom they're collecting this data have engaged in any wrongdoing, which is millions of Americans by definition. I would also add that the Senate Intelligence Committee has repeatedly asked the NSA to give a rough estimate of how many Americans are being spied upon in terms of their telephone calls and their email exchanges. And the NSA has continuously said we are incapable of providing that kind of an assessment. And yet on Friday, we published documents from their program called Boundless Informant that provides extremely detailed metrics with great mathematical exactitude about exactly how many communications they're intercepting, 3 billion every day in terms of data that they're storing, and even indicates in which country the communications are originating. And so it seems like this agency that has no accountability and that Obama is boasting now is subject to congressional oversight has been misleading the Congress in serious ways about what it is that they do and what it is that they can say they do.
Cyber has no boundaries. Everything's networked and everything, unfortunately, is vulnerable. And so the cybersecurity mission really had to blossom and really tie into the broader public sector, but also the private sector. And the last couple of years, NSA was really able to do that, understanding the fact that the public did need to have faith and confidence in us. We did need to stand our ground with respect to our knowledge of our authorities and boundaries, be open about things when we made mistakes. And so if you look at FAA 702, which is up for reauthorization right now, in Congress, across the board, NSA has actually been in a good place because we have demonstrated our ability to actually be good shepherds of our authorities, to have strong compliance regimes, and when we make mistakes, we're transparent about it. We never try to hide bad news.
Here's the eerie truth. Modern surveillance systems can be built so large that plausible deniability becomes an architectural feature. Not because everyone is evil, because no one person has to hold the whole picture. And if the machine is complex enough, then every denial can be technically true, while still feeling morally false. Let's talk about metadata the way it deserves to be talked about, like a weapon. Metadata tells you who calls a divorce lawyer. It tells you who calls a psychiatrist. It tells you who calls a hotline at 2:14 a.m. It tells you who stops calling a person and starts calling another. It tells you when a friendship becomes a conspiracy, not because of what was said, but because of the pattern. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's how the internet works for most people most of the time. And it means uncertainty doesn't equal ignorance. Uncertainty just means the machine lives in probabilities. And probabilities are enough to act on. Now we move from counting to cracking. If Boundless Informant tracks data, Bullrun ensures the NSA can read communications that are supposed to be secure. Bullrun is a covert, well-funded effort to exploit weaknesses in encryption algorithms, insert or encourage vulnerabilities in cryptographic standards, influence technology companies and standards bodies, intercept data before encryption or after decryption, and store encrypted data indefinitely under a harvest now, decrypt later strategy. This program reframes encryption not as a barrier, but as a temporary obstacle. And here's the conspiracy-aware angle that doesn't require fantasy. If your mission is to access target communications, encryption is a wall, so you don't just climb the wall. You try to make sure the wall is weaker than it looks. You influence standards. You exploit implementation flaws. You pressure vendors. You find backdoors by agreement, by law, by hacking. And you do something that should terrify anyone who relies on security. You collect encrypted data today and keep it until tomorrow's capability unlocks it. That's not a movie plot, that's a posture. Because it means privacy becomes temporal. You're private only until the future arrives.
You've probably noticed the tiny lock icon at the bottom of many websites. It indicates that the information you share with that site is encrypted, so hackers can't read it. Well, now, according to the latest leak from fugitive computer specialist Edward Snowden, reported by the New York Times today, the U.S. intelligence apparatus has in effect picked that lock.
To the program you're talking about, nicknamed Bullrun, the National Security Agency, according to the Times, has developed the ability to break the security codes of most, if not all, internet-based systems. Encryption, which scrambles data, is widely used to protect details of banking transactions, things like trade secrets and emails. But the report says the NSA now can decipher or defeat virtually all of those encryption programs. Officials argue the NSA and foreign intelligence partners need that kind of capability to crack encrypted terrorist chats. But at the same time, privacy advocates worry it also means the government could read coded communications of private U.S. citizens. Now, that's prohibited without a warrant, and we have to say we don't know if the NSA has ever crossed that line or how many times.
Now let's anchor the conspiracy theory-aware mind in history. COINTELPRO isn't a rumor. It's a documented series of covert FBI projects. Surveillance, infiltration, disruption, all targeting political organizations over years. This series of operations was largely illegal and were conducted from 1956 to 1971, and its main aim was to surveil, infiltrate, discredit, disrupt, and neutralize domestic political organizations and individuals the Bureau considered subversive or threatening to national stability. The term stands for Counterintelligence Program, although initially focused on the Communist Party. COINTELPRO expanded its scope dramatically in the 1960s under FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover.
It's the greatest heist you've never heard of, and one of the most important.
Last March, someone broke into the FBI offices in Media, Pennsylvania, stole some records, and mailed copies of them around to several newspapers.
Those records would help bring an end to J. Edgar Hoover's secret activities within the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
He ordered his agents not only to expose New Left groups, but to take action against them to neutralize them.
Many Americans were tapped and bugged, had their mail opened by the CIA and the FBI.
Let's take a look at the FBI's stated purpose versus reality. Their declared aim was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize groups viewed as subversive. In practice, COINTELPRO engaged in illegal surveillance, psychological warfare, misinformation, harassment, and sabotage against organizations, some of which were nonviolent and constitutionally protected. Although the Bureau claimed a focus on national security, later investigations revealed that many targets were not connected to violent activity or foreign threats.
On March 8th, 1971, 8 activists, including a cab driver, a daycare director, 2 professors, broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and stole every document they found. They wanted to document how FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was spying on citizens and actively suppressing dissent. The break-in occurred as much of the nation was fixated on a boxing match between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, which was billed as the fight of the century. The identity of the burglars would remain a mystery for over 40 years. Soon after stealing the documents, the activists, calling themselves the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI, began leaking shocking details about FBI abuses to the media. The documents exposed COINTELPRO, the FBI's secret counterintelligence program, a global, clandestine, unconstitutional practice of surveillance, infiltration, and disruption of groups engaged in protest, dissent, and social change. Targets included the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, The Black Panthers, the American Indian Movement, the Young Lords, anti-war groups, black booksellers, and other groups. The leaked documents triggered congressional investigations, increased oversight, and the eventual passage of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. The FBI never knew who was involved in the break-in until 2014, when several of the burglars made their identity public to coincide with the publication of The Burglary, a book by former Washington Post reporter Betty Metzger.
We can debate motives, we can debate scope, but we can't debate the pattern. Information wasn't collected just in case, it was used. Groups were divided, leaders were smeared, and organizations were disrupted. And the chilling part is the language. Expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize. So when someone says they would never use surveillance for political ends, the conspiracy theory-aware person doesn't have to speculate. They can just remember. The real question is, what does neutralize look like when you have digital tools instead of forged letters? When you have network maps instead of field informants? When you have metadata archives instead of file cabinets? In espionage stories of old, the informant is someone who chooses to betray. In the new story, the informant is a machine, and it doesn't need to get to know you in person. It doesn't need your diary. It just needs your metadata. Now, just because you may be conspiracy theory aware doesn't mean you're conspiracy theory addicted. And it's important to point out that because we need to be able to quantify what this style of surveillance really means. That every message collected may not be read, that every citizen may not be individually tracked at all times, that every chart or data point means the same thing in every context. But here's what remains deeply unsettling, even with caution. A system can be legal and still be abusive. A system can be imprecise and still be dangerous. And a system can be metadata only and still be intimate. And a system can be so large that oversight becomes a ritual rather than a restraint. While most people may not be individually targeted, and the programs are not primarily designed for mass human monitoring, the capabilities themselves, when combined with political polarization, weak oversight, or future authoritarian misuse, pose a general risk to the public. Because surveillance infrastructure, once built, is difficult to dismantle and easy to repurpose, the danger lies less in current intent than in latent power. So let me give you a non-Hollywood scenario that doesn't have explosions or fanciful plot lines. A person wakes up, checks their phone, opens a map, texts a friend, signs into an app. Maybe they buy coffee. They tap their card, and they cross a street under a camera, and then they go home. All of it is normal. And above it, somewhere above it, there's another map. Not Google Maps, a different map. A heat map. A dashboard. A place where the world becomes counts and categories. A place where someone can ask, what type of coverage do we have? And the system answers, near real time. The scariest part isn't that a watcher exists, it's that we've adjusted to the possibility so completely that we treat it like weather. Of course they track, of course they collect, of course it's all connected. And when you accept that, the machine wins something priceless, and it's not your secrets, it's your acceptance. Taken together, disclosures of these programs reveal that our security apparatuses can measure and optimize surveillance by collecting large volumes of communications data. They are capable of undermining the cryptographic protections meant to secure digital communications. And that metadata, often dismissed as harmless, is treated as strategic intelligence. And that surveillance is no longer episodic or targeted alone, but continuous, infrastructural, and systemic. And the revelations of these programs pose some fundamental questions. Can democratic societies sustain mass surveillance infrastructures without abuse? Is strong encryption compatible with state intelligence goals? What does privacy mean when participation in society generates surveillance by default? These questions remain unresolved, but the architecture of these systems continue to shape the digital world today. And while these are all programs from different eras using different tools, they have the same gravity, the gravity of power toward information. The gravity of information towards control. And the final eerie thought is this: you don't need a hidden council to explain the world. You just need a system that can't resist what it can measure, a system that confuses capability with permission, a system that calls it metadata because calling it a portrait of your life would sound too honest. That's all I have for this episode. Thank you for listening. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, or write a review.
There is a signal broadcast every second of every day through our television sets.
Mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes.
Science and technology are propelling us forward at accelerating rates.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.